of forms, sounds, odors, and so on. And in this way, one uses 6 kinds of joy based on renunciation to overcome 6 kinds of sadness based on renunciation. Okay, but even the joy based on renunciation, the joy that comes from either deep samadhi or the joy that arises through insight, underlying that joy there can be a subtle attachment, a subtle clinging. In fact, this is even, one could say that this is almost the more dangerous. No, I don't want to put it this way. But this could be a subtle clinging that keeps one bound to at least to lower states of realization and keeps one within the cycle of birth and death. And so to reach full liberation, one has to overcome even that subtle clinging to states of joy, bliss, and rapture. And so this is to be done by replacing the feeling of joy with the feeling of equanimity. And so the Buddha says, by depending on the 6 kinds of equanimity based on renunciation, abandon and surmount the 6 kinds of joy based on renunciation. It is thus sound. No, it's come back. Okay. That one died. Then why did this one die also? Anyway, let us continue. Okay, I have sound. Okay, so when based on the 6 kinds of equanimity, based on renunciation, one overcomes the 6 kinds of joy based on renunciation. And I think this can be understood both from the standpoint of samadhi and from the standpoint of insight, vipassana. From the standpoint of samadhi, one could understand that after entering the first and second and third jhanas, which are accompanied by somanassa, by the feeling of joy or pleasure, one progresses to the 4th jhana, which is accompanied by neutral feeling or equanimity. And then from the standpoint of insight, in the early stages of insight, the experience of insight is accompanied by joy, delight, even bliss as one is gaining insight into the impermanence of things. But as one progresses further, then that feeling of joy subsides and is replaced by the feeling of equanimity. Don't worry about it, Johnny. We can just pass. People can just speak loudly when they have questions. Okay, any questions at this point in the exposition? Okay, so now we pass on to the next section. Now the Buddha is going to be speaking about taking equanimity as the topic or theme, and then explaining how equanimity is successively refined. So he speaks about equanimity that is diversified based on diversity. So what is that? He says there is equanimity regarding forms, sounds, odors, flavors, and tangibles or tactile objects. This is equanimity that is diversified based on diversity. So this is contrasting you could say the equanimity which arises from sensory experience with now we're going to move to equanimity that's unified based on unity. And then to explain this, he says there is equanimity in regard to the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception nor non-perception. So this is the equanimity that is unified based on unity. Okay, what is missing, not explicitly brought into this contrast, is the equanimity that's present in the jhanas, the jhanic attainments. So we have equanimity that is diversified, that is spread out amongst the 5 types of sense objects, and then equanimity that's unified. This is the equanimity that's present in the 4 arupa samapattis, the 4 formless meditative attainments. But what about the equanimity in the jhanas? Okay, that also, I would say, is equanimity that is based on unity. But the equanimity in the jhanas, though it's based on unity, because it's based on a single object, on the unification of the mind on the objects. But there is still, one could say, diversity amongst the objects of jhanas. So one could say that there's the jhana based on the earth kasina, the equanimity based on the water kasina, equanimity based on a blue kasina, red kasina, white kasina, yellow kasina, the jhana based on loving kindness, based on compassion, based on altruistic joy, based on equanimity towards people. So many different objects of jhana, even though the equanimity within the jhana is unified based on unity. And also the equanimity in the jhana, the 4 jhanas, though if much more exalted than the equanimity based on sense pleasures, but it's still not yet fully purified. But when you're looking for the fully unified, fully purified equanimity, that is what one finds in the formless meditations, going up to the peak of the equanimity based on the meditation of neither perception nor non-perception, the subtlest and most exalted meditative attainment on the side of samadhi. Okay, so the Buddha says, now he brings in the aspect of transcendence here. By depending and relying on equanimity that is unified, based on unity, abandon and overcome equanimity that is diversified based on diversity. It is thus that this is abandoned, thus this is overcome. So this sets up, again, it uses the polarity of the equanimity that's diversified, spread out among sense objects, and contrasting that with the equanimity based on the four formless meditations. But actually, to reach the equanimity of the formless meditations, we have to, climb up a ladder with many, many rungs to it. So we start with our ordinary, day-to-day meditation. Then we're practicing at least for a certain amount of time. We might be able to discard, the distraction of the mind by sensory objects and keep the mind focused, even if we can just unify the mind for a few moments on its object, whether it be mindfulness of the breath, mindfulness of bodily sensations, mindfulness or meditation on loving kindness, recollection of the Buddha, or any other meditation object. We're able to, overcome temporarily distraction by the five hindrances and keep the mind focused on a single object, even just for a few moments. Then we're getting a taste of that experience of equanimity based on unity, on unification of mind. Okay, as one progresses further, through intensive practice, then one enters the first jhana, which is accompanied by joy, but then one progresses to the second jhana, still accompanied by joy, third jhana, still accompanied by joy, then the fourth jhana, where joy gives way to indifferent feeling or equanimity. Then from the fourth jhana, then one can progress to the formless meditations in which that equanimity based on unity becomes even more purified, speak of unity becoming more unified. That sounds redundant. So let's say that the equanimity based on unity becomes increasingly more refined and more purified. Okay, but even underlying the equanimity of the formless meditations, including the equanimity that accompanies the base of neither perception nor non-perception, even underlying that, there is a subtle clinging. And we see this contrast brought out in an interesting sutta, very deep sutta, number 106. Okay, this is on page 872. Okay, the text says that the Buddha is speaking about the lower perceptions, and then he says, where these perceptions cease without remainder, that is the peaceful, that is the sublime or the excellent, namely the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Okay, when he practices in this way and frequently abides thus, his mind acquires confidence in that base. Once there is full confidence, he either attains to to the base of neither perception nor non-perception now, or else he resolves upon it with wisdom. Okay, on the dissolution of the body after death, it is possible that the evolving consciousness may pass on to the base of neither perception nor non-perception. So as long as there's a subtle clinging that underlies that experience of equanimity, the mind is not yet fully liberated. And then later on the same, or lower on the same page, the Buddha says when the monk clings, he's clinging to the base of neither perception nor non-perception. He clings to the best object of clinging, for this is the best object of clinging, the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Okay, but then the Buddha goes on to explain how the monk practices in such a way that he attains that base. This is on page 873. Thus he obtains equanimity, but he does not delight in that equanimity, welcome it, or remain holding to it. And since he does not do so, his consciousness does not become dependent on it and does not cling to it. And the monk without clinging attains nibbana. Okay, so even though one attains the base of neither perception or non-perception, which has the most refined type of equanimity, one can either, if one doesn't see it with insight and understand it with insight, there'll still be a subtle clinging to it, and that clinging becomes a bond which keeps one tied even to rebirth into the base, the realm of neither perception nor non-perception, which is still a state within the cycle of birth and death. But when one overcomes that clinging, even to that subtlest equanimity, then the mind is liberated. And so the Buddha is going to explain this here using different terminology in the present sutta. He says, okay, paragraph 20, by depending and relying on equanimity that is unified, based on unity, one abandons and overcomes equanimity that is diversified. Okay, then the next stage, next phase, by depending and relying on, here the Buddha uses a word, āyatanavibhanga, abandon and overcome equanimity that is unified, based on unity. It is thus, this is abandoned and overcome. Okay, we have this term, āyatanavibhanga. The word is actually created by stringing together a number of other words and particles. So first we have the negation which just means non, same as the English word non. Then we have tongue, which means that. Then the word maya, which means made of or made by. And then the suffix ta, which turns it into an abstract noun. Something like the ending in English, nis, N-E-S-S. Okay, so ātamayata means literally not, how to put this, not made of thisness, not made of thatness. The commentary explains it as the absence of craving, but I take that to be somewhat too simplistic. I say maybe I would call this a deeper meaning. It means not identifying with, this way I interpret it, not identifying with, not taking oneself to consist in that. Not taking that to be I, mine, or myself. And so what this would mean, in effect, is that one who attains that equanimity of the base of neither perception nor non-perception in order to liberate the mind from the subtle clinging to that equanimity, contemplates even that equanimity as being not mine, not I, not myself. So this is why I render ātamayata, non-identification, not taking to be I or mine. And so then the text says, by depending and relying on non-identification, abandon and overcome equanimity that is unified based on unity. It is thus this is abandoned, thus that is overcome. And then the commentary again identifies that ātamayata as uses a technical expression that comes within the scheme of the Visuddhimagga. It's called insight leading to emergence. This is the insight that is a bridge between the earlier stages of insight and the attainment of the world-transcending path. So it's the insight that culminates in the attainment of the Lokuttara Magga, the world-transcending or liberating path. And so this would be a practitioner who, there are different routes that different practitioners take. This would be a practitioner who is able to achieve the formless meditative attainments, then uses insight into the impermanence and the selfless nature of the formless meditations in order to reach the supramundane path. And so such a practitioner would probably easily achieve arahatship. Okay, any questions on this so far? Yes, Chris? Is the microphone working now? Okay.
Could the word ātamayata, could that be referring to something like conceptual proliferation? Like instead of non-identification, like non-discrimination?
Non-discrimination.
Like kind of, in the Zen tradition, there's kind of an emphasis on abandoning conceptual thinking.
I don't think it would be the abandoning of conceptual thinking as such, because conceptual thinking would have been abandoned within even the jhanas and the formless meditations. So here there is actually, one has emerged from the jhana, and one is actually, the way I see it, one is using a conceptual thinking as a mode of understanding the formless meditation, and seeing it as being not mine, not I, not myself. That's my interpretation. The expression itself, I have to say, is not, it's used in the text without explanation. And so it's almost a little bit like a riddle to figure out what does the word actually mean. So to get the meaning, one has to take it in the various contexts in which it's used.
It seems like at some point you have to just give up the notion of self entirely. It's not even saying that something is not mine, it's just, or not myself. You just abandon this, even this notion of self.
Well, I think to abandon the notion of self, to actually eradicate it at the deepest level, one has to contemplate, or at least this is the way laid out, I'm not giving my opinion, the way it's laid out in the suttas, is that one contemplates the various objects of contemplation as being either impermanent, suffering, not self, or as being not mine, not I, not myself. Then when one uproots the idea of self, the idea of I and mine, then one doesn't have to use any contemplation of it as being not self. Any other questions? Okay, then let's go on to the last section of this sutta, which it's rather be a little surprising because we always hear about 4 satipatthanas, 4 foundations of mindfulness, but here the Buddha is speaking of 3 foundations of mindfulness. But they're quite different from the 4 foundations of mindfulness. These are called the 3 foundations of mindfulness that the Noble One cultivates, cultivating which the Noble One, the Aryo, the Buddha here is referring to himself, is a teacher fit to instruct a group. Okay, and now he's explaining what these 3 foundations of mindfulness are. So he says, compassionate, concerned with their welfare, the teacher, the word satta always refers to the Buddha, teaches the Dhamma to his disciples out of compassion, saying, this is for your welfare, this is for your happiness. But his disciples don't want to listen to him, and they don't try to understand, and they actually turn away from his instruction. Okay, so now the text says, with that, the Tathagata is not satisfied. Of course, he's not satisfied and he feels no satisfaction. He's not happy that his disciples are not listening to him and that they're actually going astray. Yet he dwells unmoved, mindful and fully aware, clearly comprehending. So his mindfulness in this situation is the first foundation of mindfulness that he cultivates. So here the Buddha maintains this equanimity when the disciples are not following his instructions. He doesn't fall into domanassa, into grief, displeasure, sadness, disappointment. And of course, he's not elated by this and joyful over it, but he maintains this equanimity. So that's the first foundation of mindfulness. The second foundation of mindfulness, again, the Buddha is teaching his instructions, giving them guidance on what's for their welfare and happiness. Okay, some don't pay attention or don't listen to him and take his advice, while others listen and take his advice. Okay, so this is called a mixed audience. Okay, so with that, again, the Tathagata is not satisfied and feels no satisfaction. That is, he's not satisfied with those who don't pay attention and turn away from his instructions, and yet he's not dissatisfied and feels no dissatisfaction. So remaining free from both satisfaction and dissatisfaction, he dwells in equanimity, mindful and fully aware. Again, that mindfulness here is the second foundation of mindfulness that he cultivates. Okay, then the third situation, this is where the Buddha is teaching a group, and everyone in the group pays attention to his instruction and follows it, so they do not turn aside from the teacher's instruction. Okay, so with that, the Tathagata is satisfied. Now he's satisfied and he feels satisfaction. So he would feel some kind of, even, I would say he might feel some somanassa, some joy or pleasure in that. And yet he dwells unmoved, mindful and fully aware. Again, that mindfulness is the third foundation of mindfulness that he cultivates. And so in this way it's said that he's fit to instruct a group. So it's with reference to this that it was said that there are these three foundations of mindfulness. You have to press, there's a button, you turn it up. Okay, just try it. There might be still a bit of life in it. Okay, so speak loudly.
In section 22,
Yeah,
it says, without the Tathagata is not satisfied, feels no satisfaction.
yeah.
So, and in section 23, it says he's neither dissatisfied nor satisfied. Which would equanimity be neither satisfied nor dissatisfied? Because in section 24 it says he's satisfied or satisfaction. Shouldn't it be like the same reaction or same?
I think no, I don't think that the Buddha, though it said that he remains unmoved. I didn't check the Pali word on this. But I think what's meant by unmoved is that he's not moved by attachment to the situation. But when the disciples listen and pay attention and follow his instruction, he'll feel happiness over that. And he would feel pleased with that. It's not like he's, just a completely unfeeling block of stone. Yeah, Edwin. You have to speak loudly now.
The three foundations of mindfulness in the Sutta explain the liberation of attaining the jhanas, attaining of the jhanas, and the attaining of the jhanas, which is the sina. Actually, attaining of the jhanas through a pure or beautiful sina or the Brahma Vihara. But here is different. I don't know why you change the three foundations.
Wait, say again, I didn't quite catch it.
In another sutta, there was three foundations of mindfulness, the liberation
which other sutta did you see three foundations? I don't know a sutta that explains three foundations of mindfulness in terms of the way. I have to have the text cited. Let me see. No, I don't. You said that it's in the notes? That's referring to the next section, not to the three foundations of mindfulness section. Let's go to the next section so that we finish the sutta.
I don't get it. I'm so sorry. The three foundations of mindfulness are.
Okay, in this case, the Buddha, in a way, mindfulness here is in the background, but when the disciples are not listening, not following instructions, the Buddha doesn't feel satisfied, and yet he remains unmoved, mindful and clearly comprehending. When there's a mixed audience, some following, some deviating from his instructions, the Buddha is not satisfied and feels no satisfaction. I would think, I have to say, that he should be satisfied and feel satisfaction with those who are following the instruction. And yet he's not dissatisfied. I have to say, the second one I'm a little puzzled by myself. The third one is obvious. Okay, when the disciples follow the instructions, then the Buddha is satisfied and feels satisfaction. Yeah, that is the case. The second one needs a little further thought, but let me just go quickly to end the sutta. Okay. Okay, so the three foundations of mindfulness, they qualify the Buddha as the teacher. So then it goes on to say, among the teachers of training, he is the one called the Anuttara Purisa Dhammasarati, the unsurpassed leader or trainer of persons to be tamed. And with reference to what was this said? Okay, then he uses the simile of the elephant trainer who is able to train an elephant so that the elephant will go in any direction in which he's instructed to go, east, west, north, or south. Similarly with the horse, with the ox. So those are animals to be tamed. And the word used here is Dhamma, to be tamed. Not Dhamma, but Dhamma. Okay, but in describing the Buddha, his role is that of a Sarati, which means like a trainer. Literally, it's a charioteer who trains Purisa Dhamma, persons who are capable of being trained or tamed. And how does he do that? He tames a person to go in 8 directions. And these 8 directions are what are called elsewhere the 8 vimokkha, which is often translated 8 liberations. But these are not states of final liberation. But these are temporary liberation of mind. States of exalted states of samadhi, except for the last one. Okay, the first three are a little problematic. I don't want to go into attempts to explain them here, but the first three seem to be different modes for attaining the four jhanas. One is called, okay, I'll explain them very briefly. Possessed of form, he sees forms. This is the first direction. So in order to understand these, we do have to rely on the commentary, because the suttas themselves don't give an explanation of what is meant. So possessed of form, the commentary says, is that one takes some visible form based on one's own body, and one uses that as an object of concentration. So one could take the black of the hair, since Indians have black hair, and use that as a kasina object representing the blue kasina. Or one can take the red color of the blood to represent the red kasina, the whites of the eyes to represent the white kasina. And so one uses some internal object in order to focus the mind on, in order to gain absorption. Okay, then the second one is not perceiving forms internally, he sees forms externally. I was just thinking that describes me perfectly right now. But I don't consider this a liberation. I'm not seeing forms internally, and I'm seeing forms externally. But this is the case of one who doesn't use some part of the body as the object of concentration, but uses an external form as the object of concentration. So somebody might focus on like the red soil to get the earth kasina, or the blue sky to get the blue kasina, or a white cloud to get the white kasina, or make a kasina object that's a circular disc that represents either one of the elements or a particular color. Okay, then he's resolved only upon the beautiful. This is what you're referring to, Edwin. This is using either extremely beautiful color kasinas. I think that would be the correct interpretation. Extremely beautiful colored objects as the basis for meditative absorption. But the commentary says one could also consider this to refer to the Brahmaviharas, or the four divine abodes: loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, or equanimity. Okay, then come the four formless meditations, and then the last one is the special attainment called the cessation of perception and feeling, which is attained not merely through samadhi meditation, but as through the combination of samadhi and insight. Okay, so then the text concludes by saying that guided by the Tathagata, the person to be tamed goes in these 8 directions. And that takes us to the conclusion of the sutta. Okay, at this point, well, I'll have to stop. And if there are questions, points for discussion, we'll meet here again, say 12:15, then we can have some discussion. Okay, let us end with the sharing of the merits. Okay, so we share the merits with the deities, the devas, the bhutas, the fierce spirits, the nagas, the dragon spirits, and all sentient beings. And then, before we do that, next week we have the class on Sutta number 138. Should be able to do the whole thing in one session. Okay, so let us recite. Akasata chabumata devanaga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata devanaga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata devanaga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagupadaya avichihetato etantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha asanya sanyino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibuting. Please remember that I think it's 2 weeks from now there's going to be a third retreat on the Abhidhamma. So even if you haven't taken the first 2 retreats, if you want to come to this retreat, still possible. No prerequisites. And I think it'll be pretty intelligible on its own.